Good morning, everyone. Many of you may already know this. Some of you may not, so I apologize sort of for the abrupt manner of communicating this, but my dad passed away last night at 10 o'clock. Now, the reason I'm leading with that is because I know that because I've already been asked this question this morning, what are you doing here this morning? Why are you still preaching? My dad was ordained for gospel ministry about 70 years ago. And he has, I haven't counted them, but we did bring them from Brazil with us when we moved him up here. Handwritten manuscripts of every one of the sermons that he preached over those 70 years. And my dad was old school, or part of the old school church, maybe I'll say, where pastors preached 3 different sermons every week. Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and then Wednesday night prayer meeting, which wasn't really a prayer meeting, it was just another service, but they might have prayed during it. And growing up, we went to church every Sunday. I remember with my dad, my dad and I together were on a road trip on a Sunday morning. And I think we were driving through Oklahoma. 10 o'clock, pull over, found a church, went to church. We were the last people to leave that church. And so I honestly feel like my dad honored the Lord with his life, and it honored him. I want to honor him and the Lord by being here with you this morning. So now the awkward transition into the sermon. When Ethan, our older son, was a toddler, I think he was about 2 years old, maybe 1.5, we had been to this little arts and crafts fair, and at that fair we encountered this artist who was doing pencil sketches of people, and they looked really good. We were really impressed, and we had this incredible idea, hey, we're going to commission some pencil sketches of Ethan, and then we're going to frame it and give one to his paternal grandparents and one to his maternal grandparents for Christmas. We thought this was a great idea. So we talked to the artist, we struck a deal, we took him a photo of Ethan from which to work. And a few weeks later, I went to pick them up, and disappointing would be mild. We looked at the first one, we were like, that's not great. He did a much better job on those other samples that we saw out there. We looked at the second one, and we were appalled. Like repulsed. This didn't even look like our son. It wasn't just inaccurate, it was weird. This toddler, sort of man-child leering at you awkwardly from this pencil sketch. And if it bothered us as human parents to see our son so poorly portrayed, how must it concern God when his children image him inaccurately? Could it be that the God we actually worship is nothing like the God we think we worship? So is it possible that the concept of God that we carry in our minds and hearts has been distorted? This is the focus of the second of God's 10 commandments. It has to do with how God has revealed himself and how we as his children are to conceive of him and how we are to worship him and how we are to be in relationship with him. If you do not have a hard copy Bible with you this morning and you would like to borrow one for the rest of the service, the ushers are coming back down the aisles now, and if you raise your hand, they'll be glad to give you one. The principle that undergirds the second commandment is this: we must not image God in a way that he has not imaged himself. The stakes are really high when it comes to this question, because the issue is this: who are we actually worshiping? In this command, either implicitly or explicitly, God warns his children of the danger of worshiping him as a physical form, in a visual form, or with a character other than his own. So I'd like us to read this command and then unpack these three cautions. And interestingly enough, this command is one of the longest. If you just look at it on the page, you'll be able to see this. So in Exodus 20, now a reminder, Exodus is the second book of the Bible, and chapter 20 begins with God giving what we now today call the Ten Commandments. So I'll be reading from verses 4 through 6. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So we begin with this admonition that we must not worship God as a physical form. Now, that comes across pretty clearly in this commandment. They are not to create or make a physical image and worship it. The danger wasn't actually that the people initially would start worshiping dogs or cats or mice or the sun or the moon or stars in and of themselves. That's not really the primary danger initially. The caution that we're given is don't assign these forms to God. In other words, don't say that, oh, this is what God looks like. God looks like a cow. This is his physical manifestation. So we worship God in this cow. God knew that humanity would always have a tendency to identify him with forms of his creation, to create God in the image of what God had already created. Now, why is this? Well, because that's all we know. We know the physical world. We're familiar with it. We experience it. But this is also why God is so against us trying to assign a physical form to him, because placing him in any physical created form is to make God less than he is. It has to. For no created being is greater than its creator. But Israel, the people who are receiving these commandments, they were going to long for to put God into a physical form, to have a physical form to worship. And they're going to break this command throughout the generations over and over and over again. In fact, let me give you a little bit of context here. God is speaking these commandments to a man named Moses, the leader of the people of Israel. He's up on this mountain called Mount Sinai. And God met with him there, and he's entrusting himself to Moses, who is going to in turn entrust these commands and this revelation of God to the people. As the story goes, the people down in the valley got impatient. And they're like, Moses has been gone a really long time. He's our leader, but we don't know where he is. He disappeared up this mountain. He may never come back. And then this is what they do. So I'm skipping forward a few chapters in Exodus to Exodus 32, right at the beginning of that chapter, but you understand it's a number of pages ahead in the book, but it's while God is talking to Moses up on the mountain. Same time, it's concurrent. So already this is happening. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, Aaron was Moses' brother. He was the priest of Israel, so he was like second in command. And this is what they said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't even know what's happened to him." Now consider the irony here. We've talked about the history. These people, the ones who are saying, make us gods who will go before us, they were just, a few months earlier, slaves the whole nation, slaves in Egypt. And God incredibly and miraculously and overwhelmingly sets them free, brings them out, provides for them, splits the Red Sea, brings them through on dry ground, destroys the entire Egyptian army that's pursuing them, provides food for them and water for them consistently and daily in the middle of the desert. And now they're saying, we need gods. We need gods. Make us some gods. I say this to Aaron. Now, God is not contained by any physical form. So he admonishes his people, don't make one and say it is me. Because I want to read a little bit further in this account of what we call the golden calf. Aaron answered them. So Aaron the priest says to the people, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings, brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, this announcement is really important. And Aaron announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. And that word Lord, if you're watching it in the text, you've heard me address this before. It's the word Lord written all in capital letters. That's the name of God. The way that we usually say that now, drawing from the Hebrew, is Yahweh. So you see what Aaron is saying. He's not saying, oh, we're abandoning Yahweh and we're just going to worship this golden calf. No, he's saying, hey, this golden calf, hey, everybody, this golden calf, this is Yahweh. God is spirit, and we who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. Secondly, we must not worship God in a visual form. Today, more than ever, I think we all know this because it probably applies to each one of us as well to some extent. Across cultures, borders, ethnicities, and traditions, we are growing in our obsession with the visual. If it's not visual, and you can't make it visual, it's not worth my time. Seeing is believing. You heard that before? Don't give me a story, give me Netflix. Don't give me a book, give me a screen. I don't think it's accidental that our society has moved so rapidly away from the printed and spoken word and accepted only the visual image. And in some ways, our culture isn't really that different from Israel of the ancient Near East either. They too wanted something visual. They wanted their God to be contained as something they could see, but that was never God's intent. And again, I just want to emphasize this. To contain God within something visible is to severely limit the limitless. Would make God far less than he is. And this is part of the incredible blessing of this second commandment, is it's a reaffirmation of the tremendous nature, transcendent being who is the God who has set us free. A few books forward in the Old Testament, book of Deuteronomy, the word Deuteronomy means second law, and the reason it's called the second law is because the people, after rebelling against God, Israel gets, their consequence for that is that they will have to wait 40 years before they eventually enter the land, the promised land that God had prepared for them. So Deuteronomy takes place at the end of those 40 years. So they finally fulfilled this consequence of their sin, and they're about to actually go into the promised land. And Moses, their leader, takes a long time to review with them their whole history and to review with them all of God's law that he had revealed. But as he's speaking to them and he's reminding them and telling them, reminding them of their history, he talks about these days at that mountain, at Mount Sinai. And this is what he says. You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. I want to reemphasize that again. You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, so that you do not become corrupt and make for yourselves an idol, an image of any shape, whether formed like a man or a woman, or like any animal on earth, or any bird that flies in the air, or like any creature that moves along the ground, or any fish in the waters below. And when you look up to the sky and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the heavenly array, do not be enticed into bowing down to them and worshiping things the Lord your God has apportioned to all the nations under heaven. The emphasis was on God's voice. This is how he revealed himself. He revealed himself in word, right? Not in a visible form, not in a physical form, but through what they could hear. The second commandment summons us to be faithful in not assigning a visible form to God. And again, because no visible form could ever do him justice. Now, I understand that there is, in a way, an exception to this, isn't there? What might this be? In what physical form, or through what physical form, did God reveal himself? In Jesus, his son, who took on human flesh. At the same time, we don't know exactly what he looked like, right? We don't have a photograph. And of course, photography didn't exist then, but I think that's for a purpose, because I know our tendency is that if we had some sort of very clear physical representation of Jesus, we'd be tempted to worship that and venerate that. So I just want to be clear here. I don't think it's wrong for artists to make renderings of Jesus, to paint or draw, because Jesus was in a human form. The danger, though, is when we start to worship that painting or drawing or symbol. And thirdly, we must not worship God with a character other than his own. And this is the area that I think comes most to bear on us today. And again, remember this principle: we must not image God as he has not imaged himself. And that applies to his character and commands as much as it applies to his physical or visual representation. So just as we are not to give him a physical or visual form, so also we must not assign to him a character or actions that are not his. This happens when people say or represent or claim things about God that are not in line with the way God has revealed himself. It happens when we twist his word, twist his nature, twist his commands to make God, a little bit more pleasant, or a little bit more palatable, or a little bit more like what we think he should be, or what we would want him to be like. I don't know if you've ever had anybody misquote you or claim that you said something that you never said, and it paints you in a bad light. Or maybe they just change the inflection of what you said to make it sarcastic, Like you say to someone, "Good job." And then they go to someone else and says, "Yeah, you know what he just said to me? He just said, 'Good job.'" Now, how does that make you feel when you're misrepresented that way? "I never said that." Or "That's not what I meant. That's not me." Now consider that if you feel unjustly represented, reflect on the implications of God being unjustly represented. I realize that the church has a reputation maybe for harping on certain sins more than others, but I just want to use one broad area as an example of this. And that's broadly in the area of human sexuality. You've heard, you've seen, you've experienced, as have I, this incredible pressure to cause God to condone behaviors and lifestyles that he has clearly revealed are not in line with his character or his will or his desire for humanity. So to affirm that God affirms things that God does not affirm is to break the second commandment. It's to image God as he has not imaged himself. And when I'm misrepresented, it may bother me, and possibly, it might potentially lead to some other problems here and there. But if God is misrepresented, it can have eternal consequences and implications. And we'll get to that in a moment. What aspect of God's character is particularly emphasized here in this command? This might seem like a strange one to us, but it's that he is a jealous God. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Now in Hebrew, the words interpreted jealous God, they're actually a name. It's one of God's names. It's El-Kanah. Okay? So in other words, that phrase in Hebrew as a literal rendering would read, you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am El-Kanah. From a human perspective, jealousy seems wrong, right? To us, like that's something, is that ever used in a positive way? Right? Jealous. Or you're just jealous. It's never a positive, uplifting comment. But that's because we're limited in our understanding of that word. Jealousy isn't wrong in the case of a husband and a wife who are jealous for each other. They love each other, are committed to one another, and therefore protect each other. And they see, right? They're intentional about not allowing any other man or woman to come between them. It's not wrong, parents, right? When we are jealous for the good of our children. And we might step in to protect a child when they're threatened. We are jealous for their well-being. We are jealous for their protection, jealous for their love. The idea of a jealous God relates to the exclusivity of God, that he is the only one his people are to worship. But remember, this exclusivity goes both ways. God has given himself entirely to his church, and he has an intimate, personal, exclusive relationship with his children. It's not an open relationship. God's people don't date other gods or flirt with other gods or have affairs with other gods. They're in an exclusive relationship with him. And by the same token, God has given himself fully to his church, right? There aren't other entities or other peoples to whom he has entrusted or given himself. It's to his church, to his children. So when God in this context says he's a jealous God, that he's El-Kanah, and this is given as the reason or motivation for this command, here's the implication, that when we try to assign a physical or visible form to God, when we image him as other than he is, we're actually no longer worshiping him. And that's what's so dangerous. So if we say that God is a way that God is not, and then worship that conception of God, we're not worshiping God. We're not drawing near to God. We're drawing near to a false God. No matter how sincere we may be. We must worship God as he has revealed himself, or else we're not worshiping him at all. And God is jealous for us. He loves us deeply, sacrificially, and he's jealous for our good and our well-being and our life. That's why he wants to make sure that we know who he is and worship him for who he is. Because he loves us. Because he knows that any other alternative is destruction. Any other alternative is death, both physical and spiritual, and eternal. It's because he loves us that he wants us to worship him and only him as he has revealed himself. You know, there are probably many statements in life that that really annoy me, but here's one that I seriously dislike. Be the best version of yourself. And what I dislike about that is the implications that there are different versions, meaning that there's not a sincerity about who I am. To me, that implies hypocrisy. It's like, well, sometimes I'm going to be this version, but sometimes I'm going to be this version. And I understand that's not what most people who use that phrase mean. I get that. They're saying, behave, basically, right? But there is only one version of God. And he doesn't want us to be enticed by false versions of him because he's the only one. Now, I want to close by addressing the final part of this command. And this gets very personal and also joyful for me at this moment in time. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. I'm not going to do a whole lot of exegetical work with this phrase, but I just want you to make sure you get this really important principle. Both disobedience and obedience have long-lasting and far-reaching effects. The way that the NIV renders the phrase, punishing the children for the sin of the parents, I think that's an unfortunate translation. The literal translation in the ESV and a number of other English translations render it like this: visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children. God here is referring to the repetition of a specific sin, the consequences of that sin. Today we might call this generational sin. If I as a father choose to engage in a specific sin repeatedly, then the consequences of my actions are going to influence my children, right? There's going to be a susceptibility there in them to being affected by my sin. But this is where I really want to focus at this part of the sermon this morning. Each one of us can become this turning point and this source of blessing of the Lord that goes far beyond just your life. My dad was a godly man. He was almost 91 when he passed away. And my dad would have told you, because I know how he saw himself, that he was not a particularly remarkable man in the sense of, being incredibly gifted or having a famous name, being a famous, well-known speaker or author, or having a global impact that anyone might be aware of. But my dad was father to 5 kids and grandfather to 16, great-grandfather to 4. And yesterday, as he was in, the last day of his life and his fight, all 16 of those grandchildren either spoke to him there in the room, those who were physically, geographically present. And those who weren't, every single one called in and expressed their love and memories with him. And all of those 16 are living with and following Jesus. And then beyond that, my sister Julia and I posted just updates on Facebook, and I stopped. I didn't write down like where they all came from, but comments from people about the impact that my dad's life had on them came in. I mean, I know just off the top of my head, from Japan, from Australia, from Africa, from various different countries in Latin America, from Canada, of course, from the US, from different countries in Asia, all over the place, over and over and over again. If you Google my dad, you're not going to find that much. But his faithfulness to the Lord opened the door for the blessing of God to thousands of generations for those who love him and keep his commandments. And again, it wasn't because of this incredible giftedness on my dad's part. It was because my dad committed himself at a very young age to worship God as God had revealed himself. And part of the implication of that was a commitment to always seeking to know more of who God is and how he's revealed himself. 3 weeks ago, I was talking with my dad, and he said, I just convinced that God has something more for me. I want more ministry, more service. And then he followed that up by saying, I think it might be time for me to start driving again. And I was like, whoa. If you can get all of your kids and grandkids to sign off on that, then sure, go ahead. Humanity is created in the image of God, but we want the power to decide who and what God is. Do you hear the way that this command begins? You shall not make for yourself an image. That's what we all want to do. We want to make a God for ourselves, right? That's conducive to my thinking and my lifestyle. It's kind of like that artist who got that photo of Ethan. Maybe, for all I know, maybe he never looked at it. It's like, it's a lot easier if I just draw what I want to draw. Or maybe he did something else. Maybe something else happened. Maybe he glanced briefly at that photo and then never looked at it again. And then over the coming days, just made those sketches by memory. How do we image God? Only as he has imaged himself, by constantly going after him, by committing ourselves to knowing he has revealed himself. Isn't that amazing? He has shown us who he is. He hasn't hidden that. And yet, we might very briefly glance at his word, and then you've had these conversations. Doesn't the Bible say somewhere about, I think the Bible says that, it's like cleanliness is next to godliness or something like that. Doesn't the Bible talk about that? And so we must first give ourselves to his revelation. Spirit, body, word, his spirit that he's placed within us, his word which he has spoken and entrusted to us in his body, the body of Christ. And the point is that as we commit ourselves to that, may his blessing expand far beyond what we can ever do ourselves to thousands of generations for those who love him. And each one of us has that opportunity, right, to choose that. Say, God, I give myself to you the way you've revealed yourself, and I want to know you, and I will commit myself to that, to knowing you, and to loving you as you've revealed yourself, not making you in my image, but accepting that I've been made in yours. So I invite you just to reaffirm that to the Lord if you've never reaffirmed that before. If you've never made that, if you have made that commitment before. If you've never made that commitment before, then I invite you to just make that commitment this morning. Yes, Lord. Yes, I commit myself to you as you have revealed yourself. And maybe you're in the middle of a family that's a huge mess. And I want to be clear about something because I don't want to idealize my family. My mom and dad had their issues. That's what makes it even more incredible, right? How God uses people that are broken to spread his blessings. So, Lord, I want to be that turning point. And it's not through our effort, it's through our coming to him and worshiping him as he has revealed himself. Let's stand together. Let's continue to worship this Lord, our Lord, as he has shown himself. A holy God. Altars are open. Feel free to come. There's one thing I want to add to the sermon right now. It'll be brief. It's easy to interpret that second commandment and the promises about God showing his love to thousands of generations as it depends on us, right? It's our works that do this. And so if I'm really, really good, then all of my children and all of my grandchildren and all of my great-grandchildren are going to follow Jesus. And the converse is also true. When we don't experience that in real life, then we're back to that same point where it's all my fault. And that's where we get into that whole thing again about legalism and works righteousness, and I can earn it and I can do it and it's up to me. The principle of the second commandment, it's a broad principle, right? That if we love God and worship him as he revealed himself, the implications and the blessing of that will go far beyond just me. Sisters and brothers of First Friends Church, go forth into the world in peace, rejoicing in the power of the Spirit. You're dismissed.